Psalm 15 is a short psalm, and it's basically a poem organized in the form of one verse with two questions, 4 verses with 3 questions. Let's go to Psalm 15, and we'll just begin with verse 1. It says, a psalm of David. Lord, who shall abide in your tabernacle, and who shall dwell on your holy hill? Basically, tabernacle is the primary meaning is tent. It's a temporary dwelling, home, or habitation. So it can cover all temporary and permanent dwellings. The questions are organized around the 2 words for abide or to dwell. One is temporary and one is more permanent. The word for abide is gur, and it means to sojourn, to dwell with, or to be a stranger, or to dwell for a time, like a guest. The second word, translated here dwell, is shakam, and it means to settle down, or to reside, or to be established. Primary difference here is one denotes finding a place of rest starting from a wandering life, and the second, possession of a permanent place of rest starting from settled family life. The Bible in Basic English gives a slightly clearer translation. It says, Lord, who may have a resting place in your tent and a living place on your holy hill. Psalm 24, you can turn over there if you like, but I'll just read it quickly. Psalm 24 is almost a parallel, and it says, who is allowed to ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may go up to his holy dwelling place? Now, we currently sojourn in our temporary dwelling or our tent, and we are temporarily attached to God through His Spirit. And it is temporary, but as God's children, it is safe and it is continuing. Let's turn over to Isaiah 33. Isaiah 33 and verse 13. Start in verse 13. You who are far away, hear what I have done, and you who are near, acknowledge my might. Sinners in Zion are terrified. Panic grips the godless. They say, who among us can coexist with destructive fire? And who among us can coexist with unquenchable fire? Now those words that coexist or live with destructive fire and live with unquenchable fire, that word live is translated from the same word that means to abide or temporarily visit. And just to reference God as a consuming fire, that's Deuteronomy 4:24 and 9:3. Just are not going to read those. God is referenced as a consuming fire. Keep your finger there in Isaiah, and let's turn over to Exodus 15. Exodus 15 and verse 7. Exodus 15 and verse 7. In the greatness of your excellence, you overthrow those who rise up against you. You send forth your burning anger, and it consumes them like chaff. So we can see that the burning coming from God is directed towards His enemies, those who rebel or refuse to obey what He has to say. And it's directed toward our enemies if we remain faithful to God. Now back in Isaiah 33, let's read starting in verse 15. He who walks righteously and speaks honestly or with sincerity, he rejects unjust gain, or he refused to profit from oppressive measures and rejects a bribe. One who does not plot violent crimes and does not seek to harm others, this person will live in a secure place. He will find safety in the Rocky Mountain strongholds. He will have food and a constant supply of water. You will see a king in his splendor. You will see a wide land. So we'll have temporary security as we follow these concepts in Psalm 15. But we seek a permanent place, that spiritual place, that holy city. And in God's mind, this is also sure. If you go down to verse 20 here in Isaiah 33, it says, "Look upon Zion, the city of our appointed feasts. Your eyes will see Jerusalem, an undisturbed habitation, a tent which will not be folded. Its stakes will never be pulled up, nor any of its cords be torn apart." That is confirmed in Hebrews. If we go over to Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12 and verse 28. "Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe." Verse 29, "For our God is indeed a consuming fire." So the standards are the same for the temporary and the permanent. And the temporary existence is to qualify for the permanent, to learn to live and follow God's law. Now in the second verse of Psalm 15, the structure changes a bit. It goes from 2 points to 3, and the remaining verses are all divided into groups of 3. In the second verse, thought 1 is he who is walking uprightly. Psalm 15:2, he who is walking uprightly. Now the word uprightly there is tamyam, and it's derived from the root word tam, and that's basically what it says: uprightly, complete or whole, innocent, having integrity, complete or entirely in accord with truth and fact. And as we develop this verse, you'll see that even more. Based on variations of this word, tam, there's a concept in the Jewish community, or Jewish literature, of temimut. And it's the concept of being a tam, or being whole and complete. And it is defined as purity and truth, being genuine, unblemished, and blameless, as in Proverbs 10:29, where it says, "The way of the Lord is like a stronghold for the upright, but is destruction to evildoers." The word upright there is tam. And again, we reference back to Isaiah 33:6, that this person will live in a secure place. And having integrity is as in Job 4:6. "Is this not your fear, your confidence, your hope, and the uprightness of your ways?" That's the same word. Job had security in the uprightness of his ways. Deuteronomy 8 and verse 13. Let's turn over there. Deuteronomy 8 and verse 13. I'm the wrong one. 18:13, I'm sorry. 18:13. It best describes this concept. It says, "You shall be wholehearted with the Lord your God." And that tamim is wholehearted. Noah was described in this same way. Genesis 6 and verse 9 in the Jewish Publication Society, "Noah was in his generations a man righteous and wholehearted, and Noah walked with God." Here Noah is called a tzaddik ish tamim, and tzaddik means righteous, and then the wholehearted in his generation. Abraham was commanded by God also to walk in my ways and become blameless. And that was the tamim, was to walk in his ways, become blameless. Jacob, another, was described as Ishtam, and he was a gentle or mild-mannered man. And Genesis 25:27 discusses this, and it says, "As the boys grew, Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. In two other places, God describes Job as Tom Yivashar. And pardon my pronunciation of these Hebrew terms. I'm not sure how they're supposed to be pronounced. I can look them up all day, but I still don't get it. But he's described as a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. Let's go over to Job 1 and verse 8. Job 1 and verse 8. And the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. The blameless and upright, that's the Tom concept again. And in chapter 2 and verse 3, it says essentially the same thing. God asked Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that fears God and escheweth evil. Now, that word eschew means to depart from or turn aside, to put aside and leave undone, and reject or abolish. That's the same word that's used in Psalm 34 and verse 14, where we are admonished, Depart from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it. So Job was an upright man who put aside evil. He refused to do evil. When we have a wrong thought, do we kill it immediately? That's what he did. Leave sin undone or rejected. Job is again referenced in Job 28:28. And unto man, God said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. This thought then leads into the next section of verse 2. Now, this is somewhat like the old joke that light travels faster than sound, so some people appear bright until you hear them speak. In this second section, and working righteousness, it says the outward walk or appearance is bolstered by further action. And working righteousness, again, is that tzedek, justice and righteousness, or making righteousness. It's systematically, habitually, and especially to practice. And the concept is repeated in the New Testament. If we go over to Hebrews 4, Hebrews 4, verse 9 to 11, says, So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive or labor to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by some sort of disobedience. Further in 2 Timothy 2, that's a memory scripture. We probably all have it memorized. Study to show yourself approved. That word study is the same word. And it's to use speed, to make effort, be prompt or earnest or diligent. To show yourself approved to God, a workman that needs not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So systematic, diligent effort after you walk uprightly. God admonished the Israelites in Deuteronomy 12:32, All this word which I command you, you shall observe to do. You shall not add thereto, nor diminish from it. It's to be systematic. You are to know what you need to do what you need to do, and not do anything else. This then leads into the third concept expressed in verse 2. He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks the truth in his heart. God admonished Israel again in Deuteronomy 30, verse 14. It says, "But the word is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it." And this was concluding some blessings that will follow obedience. And Israel was encouraged to do and follow God's law. The man who would live like Psalm 15 is not thinking falsehood and deceit, is not considering inwardly any evil. He plans the truth inwardly. Let's go to Luke 6, verse 45. Luke 6 and verse 45. "The good man, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth what is good, and the evil man, out of the evil treasure, brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart." So unlike the Pharisees who made the claim to fit the first two concepts in this verse, they are brought up short by Christ. If you go to Matthew 23 and verse 25. Actually, let's stay in Luke. Let's go to Luke 11 and 39 first, and then we'll go back to the other one. 11 verse 39. He's rebuking the Pharisees, and he says, "Now you Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but inside you are full of robbery and wickedness." Well, now let's go over to Matthew 23, verse 25. Once again, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside are full of robbery and self-indulgence." And I wanted to read both of those because there's one word that is different in those two quotes or the admonitions, and it's the last word in each statement. In Matthew 23, the last word translated excess is the Greek for want of akrasia, and it's want of self-control, incontinence, or intemperance. So they're running out of control. They're not self-controlled in any way. And at the end of Luke 11:39, the word translated wickedness is poneria, and that means depravity, iniquity, wickedness, malice, evil purposes, and desires. So they're planning wickedness, they're planning evil all the time. Now the theme that I mentioned of temimut is found throughout Jewish literature, and I'd like to refer to one medieval writer who explained the concept of temimut this way. He said, "You should know that the precepts of the heart imply a complete harmony between our inner and outer actions regarding the service of the Lord. When the heart and the tongue and the other limbs are at one with each other, each justifying and bearing witness in favor of the other, neither contradicting nor belying the other. This is what the Holy Writ in Psalms refers to in the term wholehearted. When it admonishes us to be wholehearted with the Lord your God, and commends he that walks uprightly, works righteousness, and speaks the truth in his heart." That's Psalm 15:2. The outward walk and action naturally follows and is founded upon the inward nature, speaking the truth in the heart. So we have three characteristics here: spotless walk, conduct ordered according to God's will, and a truth-loving mode of thought. These all blend to make a wholehearted man. Now in verse 3, the psalmist switches to three negative examples, which, not coincidentally, come from the heart. Notice that by not doing these things, the things done in the previous verse are bolstered and reinforced. Psalm 15:3, in the King James Version, "He that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doth evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his neighbor." Now that word translated backbite there is ragal, and it means to go on foot, to spy out, to go about or move the feet. And it's also secondarily to be a talebearer or slander, and to go about as an explorer or a spy. There are 24 occurrences of this word in the Old Testament, and only 2 are translated as here as backbite or slander. Let's go to a couple of examples very quickly. In Joshua 14:7. Joshua 14:7. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of God, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. The word spy out there is translated from that same word. And I brought him word again as it was in my heart. Let's go back to Genesis 42 and verse 9. Joseph speaking to his brothers. Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed of them, and he said to them, "You are spies. To see the nakedness of the land you are come." So the impression in using this word in the psalm is not just of talking about your neighbor, but actively seeking fault, looking for trouble. The King James is a little bit awkward, and the New Living Translation actually says it a little bit better. It says, "Those who refuse to gossip or harm their neighbors or speak evil of their friends." Let's go to Matthew 15 and verse 18. Matthew 15 and verse 18. "But these things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart. They defile the man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defiles not a man." Because a word rests in the mind and upon the tongue before it is uttered, the speaker brings it up, as it were, from within to his tongue or to his lips before ejecting it into the world. Just as sin, when it has matured, brings forth death, evil thought, when it has matured, brings forth actual harm and evil to your neighbor. Now, our admonition is repeated again in 1 Peter 1. Let's turn over to 1 Peter 1. First Peter 1, verse 22. "So since you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls for a sincere love of the brethren, fervently love one another from the heart. For you have been born again, not of seed which is perishing, but imperishable, that through the living and enduring word of God. For as all flesh is grass, and all its glory like the flowers of the grass withers, and the flower falls off, but the word of the Lord endures forever. This is the word which was preached to you." Let's go one more verse into chapter 2. "Therefore, putting aside all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander, to seek fault in, to do evil, or simply bring reproach on him who is bound to us by the ties of kindred and friendship, is a sin which will bring its own punishment. None of these activities come from the gentle, truth-loving whole heart." Verse 4 continues the theme. where it says, "In whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors them that fear the Lord. He swears to his own hurt and changes not." Just as an aside, I noticed that the hymn, "Who Shall Dwell on Thy Holy Hill," which is based on this psalm, doesn't contain this verse. Just noticed. There is some disagreement about the translation of this verse. Kyle and Delish support the translation of the first phrase as, "He is little in his own eyes or despised." And there are a number of other translators who prefer this translation rather than, "In whose eyes a vile person is despised." Let's go to Psalm 131. Let's see if we can shed a little light on that. Psalm 131. Psalm 131, verse 1 through 3, whole psalm. "The Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my eyes haughty, nor do I involve myself in great matters or in things too difficult for me. Surely I have composed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child within me. O Israel, hope in the eternal from this time forth and forever." In 1 Samuel 15 and verse 17, there's another reference to this attitude, where Samuel was telling Saul, "When you were little in your own sight, were you not made the head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed you king over Israel." And the point is further driven home by Micah 6, verse 8. And Micah 6, verse 8 says, "He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." To me, it makes sense that David is emphasizing the quiet, humble spirit of godliness. So, to paraphrase, he is small in his own estimation and honors them that fear the Lord. Philippians 2:3 somewhat supports this translation when it says, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves." And the original Greek for that first phrase is interesting because it points to, don't even think about doing things for strife or vainglory. Based on what we just discussed in verse 2, that also buttresses the thought expressed in the second phrase of this verse, "He honors those who fear the Lord. He esteems them better than himself." And it also fits well with the final section of the verse, "He swears to his own hurt and changes not." Now, we've seen in Psalm 24 some parallel verses, so let's go back over to Psalm 24 and look at that again. Psalm 24, verse 3. "Who may ascend unto the hill of the Eternal? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, and who has not lifted up his soul to falsehood," or who does not lie. "He has not sworn deceitfully." The Net Bible, which is a newer modern language or modern English translation, translates this, "Who does not lie or make promises with no intention of keeping them," which follows in the theme. Verse 5 continues the negative examples. Verse 5, "Those who lend money without charging interest." Actually, this I'm reverting back to more positive examples. It says, "Those who lend money without charging interest and who cannot be bribed to lie about the innocent." Now, the concept of usury is interesting to me because there are a couple places where it's discussed, one of which says that it's no usury to your brother or to your neighbor, but aliens and foreigners were okay. You could charge them interest. If you look at Deuteronomy 23 and verse 19, Deuteronomy 23 and verse 19. You shall not charge interest to your countrymen, interest on money, food, or anything that may be loaned at interest. And verse 20 says, you may charge interest to a foreigner, but to your countrymen you shall not charge interest, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all that you undertake in the land which you are about to enter to possess. Leviticus 25 gives a similar take. Leviticus 25. And verse 35. If your brother becomes impoverished and is indebted to you, you must support him. He must live with you like a foreign resident or as a foreign neighbor. Do not take interest or profit from him, but you must fear your God, and your brother must live with you. You must not lend him your money at interest, and you must not sell him food for profit. The parable of the Good Samaritan expands the concept of neighbor when it talks about who was the neighbor to the Samaritan, or to the one who fell among thieves. In Luke 10, verse 36 and 37, now which of these three, think you, was a neighbor to him that fell among the thieves? And he said, he that showed mercy to him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. In Matthew 22, let's turn there, Matthew 22. Matthew 22 and verse 34. Now when the Pharisees had heard he had silenced the Sadducees, they assembled together, and one of them, an expert in religious law, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And Jesus said to him, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now you notice back in Psalm 15:5, it doesn't specify brothers or strangers. It just says he simply does not loan with usury. I think God here is revealing his mind in the matter. Once again, it is the golden rule, but even more so. Luke 12:31 to 32 says, you rather seek the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. We are entirely indebted to God. He has loaned us our very existence, as it were. Yet it is His good pleasure to give us the kingdom. There is no interest penalty. Verse 5, the second concept is, and who cannot be bribed to lie about the innocent? Let's go over to 1 Kings 15 and verse 19. First Kings 15 and verse 19. Just pull it out of context here very quickly. It says, let there be a treaty between you and me, between my father and your father. Behold, I have sent you a present of silver and gold. Go, break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me. He's bribing the Syrians to break their treaty so that he could have advantage. There are many forms of a bribe, and a bribe can be any form of coercion, even something like a special privilege to get you to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. If you've been following the antics of Congress recently, you saw some very blatant bribery going on. technically legal, but is it morally right? Now, there's a great deal summarized in these 5 verses. In the final third of verse 5 is the conclusion. King David's therefore, as it were. He concludes this entire psalm, this poem, with, such people will stand firm forever. So go and be wholehearted